Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Tove Lo called Sunshine Kitty. You know, at this point, I'm a little bit mystified why I'm as eager as I am to look up a new Tove Lo record. Seriously, there are other projects that would normally be higher on my list. It's not like I don't have a lot of catch-up albums from last week, and Tove Lo isn't even the biggest story coming out of this week of releases, be it Blink-182 somehow impressing the longtime fans, or the Zac Brown Band apparently delivering an outright catastrophe, or hell, there's even a new Glorious Sons album that I want to hear. And yet my thoughts kept coming back to the fact that of the mainstream and mainstream adjacent pop acts this decade, she's been among the most ambitious, working to structure narrative-driven concept albums that can actually have some lyrical nuance at their best. I'm not about to forget her closing track, Hey You Got Drugs, from her last album, Blue Lips, has somehow wound up as one of my favorite songs of 2017, not just the hits. But then I remember how damn inconsistent her production is, and how there have been tracks of her album that feel like they're reaching for more insight than they actually deliver, or how thematically much of her first three albums have been retracing the same burned out arc, or how she dove so deeply into selling sexuality that it's almost reached parody. I mean, credit to her for owning it as much as she has, and occasionally she puts an interesting spin on it, but when your albums as of late have been titled Ladywood, Blue Lips, and Sunshine Kitty, I'm sorry, the double entendres are getting played out. But regardless, the reviews have been, well, as inconsistent as ever for Tove Lo, but I was curious, so what do we get from Sunshine Kitty? Honestly, this is one of the most depressing types of albums for me to review, because while I've always been kind of lukewarm on Tove Lo, Sunshine Kitty makes me really question how much she's developed this decade, and at what cost? Because not only is there nothing close to her best hits or her deep cuts here, this might be one of her most slipshod projects to date, mixing her characteristic messiness in the content to a lot of the composition and production as well, which sadly sees her backslide in a really big way. I mean, I'm not quite as sure it's as bad as Ladywood, but it certainly is really damn close, and that's a big disappointment. And really, I can lay it most at the foot of one major issue, one that's always lurked around Tove Lo and her production team, but 4 albums in, it's inexcusable. The vocal production and mixing is flat out terrible. I've talked for multiple reviews now on how Tove Lo's production team, in this case specifically the Struts duo and Jack and Coke, how they have fundamentally misunderstood Tove Lo as a dynamic, if haphazard singer who needs space to get raw and loose in contrast with the tighter melodic grooves that she prefers, but here, it somehow has gotten even worse than just her peaking in the mix. No, this time around, they just turned up the highs on her vocal pickup and allowed those frequencies to blend in with the increasingly tinny percussion and synthesizers, which means at best her vocals sound jarringly out of place in a larger, more dynamic mix, and at worst, they're actively thin and grating to listen to. I should not have to tell a production team with Grammy nominations under their belt how to use a low-pass filter. And you know it's this team because when producers like Shellback or Max Martin, or even Joel Little and Ian Kirkpatrick slip in, the mixes tend to be a little bit better balanced. And while her vocals are still thin against a mix that has the least distinctive identity out of any Tove Lo album, it's at least competent pop production. But that might be the most burning indictment of the instrumentation as a whole. It's competent, but never distinctive, or excellent, or even all that tuneful. At its best, we get the half-chipmunk backing vocals and the buttery acoustic guitar on Glad He's Gone, off the fizzy but kind of rickety trap beat, or maybe how Mateo relies on that deeper synth for tone, even despite the synthesizers laying that film form at the top of the mix. Hell, the watery knock of Anywhere You Go, it's nothing special, but the desaturated guitar at least anchors something of a hook before the trap knock slides in. Now compare this to how badly the vocals and beat are layered against the cycling progression and the pitch-shifted vocals on Are You Gonna Tell Her? Or how Jax Jones strips out any fragment of personality with an even thinner vocal pickup and this pulsating beat that feels left over from the 2014 house scene on Jacques, which doesn't match with anything on the album for the record. Or how Come Undone drowns its sample behind a cushion of painfully cheap-sounding trap skitters. And that similar pulsating cheapness permeates Really Don't Like You, a collaboration with Kylie Minogue that sounds like a beat that Kylie Minogue would have rejected rejected in the mid-90s for being too generic. But you know what, I can at least kind of understand the appeal there in comparison with the rickety, slipshod blur of tones on Equally Lost, which sounds like everybody tried to make a reggaeton beat and they somehow failed. Think about that. It's a sound that hasn't really evolved in that scene for the past 4 or 5 years in the mainstream, and they can't even get that right. So, okay, my next step here would be raising some serious questions surrounding what budget and connections that Tove Lo was trying to leverage to move this project, because it's not like she's alone in picking up pop production that sounds cheap as all hell in 2019. You can track that pattern all the way back to Ariana Grande and Thank You Next. But the big differences are that A, Tove Lo's production has always been messy, she's not really following a trend, and B, even if she is following a trend, it's not in a way that reflects experimentation. It's closer to what the Psycho music problem of just sounding really cheap and unflattering, and sadly really by the numbers. You could swap out some of these beats with any number of B and C-list mainstream pop acts, many who are weaker and less expressive singers than Tove Lo, and you would not be able to tell that these songs were made for her, which becomes an even more glaring issue when you look at some of the writing. Now again, one of the things I have praised Tove Lo for is her sexual provocation and her willingness to tell more of a story across the arc of her album. And you know what, to her credit, if there is an arc here, it's slightly different than her last couple of albums. And it is fair to think there might be an arc, given the character of Mateo as a distant, half-abusive lover crops up a couple of times, first seeming to be an ex of her friend before involving himself with Tove Lo, even as she flits away from a girl who dumped her after a summer fling. Now, there is an opening for a lot of development, storytelling, and even drama here. Falling hard for an emotionally abusive dude who happens to be your friend's ex, dealing with deeply held feelings of inadequacy along the way, even when you shouldn't feel that way. When this album is kind of at its best in the writing, it's trying to drill into the overthought frustration and the questions of feelings that would be different from her given what we know, which is why it feels so utterly bizarre that Tove Lo seems to be shying away from the more interesting drama and provocation that was all over her previous work. I mean, the double entendres were oversold before, I remember Disco Tits, but it was something that Tove Lo owned as part of her distinctive identity in mainstream pop, which is why the lack of detail in her melodrama and storytelling makes a lot of this lack personality. And then there's all the insecurity, which, yes, makes sense given that it was obvious in his habits that there were deeper underlying issues behind the hard living, and by the end of Blue Lips, the drug abuse was not helping anymore, so she's lost that defense mechanism. But across this album, we are getting multiple underwritten songs full of questioning and self-doubt, sold to the point where I had to check it to see if Julia Michaels had a writing credit. And if these are songs that have the subtext of, oh god, I hooked up with my best friend's ex and he's now being abusive to me just like he was to her, because textually that is there throughout how the intro flows into the opening song and throughout the song Mateo and the song about whether or not they're going to tell her, that features a guy with the same sort of dismissive behavior. I mean, that'd be one thing, but it almost seems like these songs were written to be less interesting, or minus even the tangled subtext that made at least parts of Blue Lips and Lady Wood interesting, if not good. But what bothers me the most is how this album ends. After a song where she questions how much work she puts into relationships, and a song where she examines all of her frustrated jealousy, we get the closest thing to a straightforward love song on the project, where she just wants something to click with this guy. Right after 2 songs where you can believably question if she's being gaslit in the same neglectful relationship that her friend just went through. I mean, she said she hasn't changed, but I remember Tove Lo being a little bit more street smart than this. Maybe desperation will lower standards and expose vulnerability, but it sure as hell doesn't feel as bright as it's being framed here, and they're not getting that added element of lyrical complexity, and yeah, that bugs me a lot. And at this point, you know what? No, I can't get behind this. The uneven production that has somehow only gotten worse, the instrumentals that still lack color, a thematic arc that is the definition of undercooked, if not questionable. Sunshine Kitty is a real disappointment from Tove Lo. A friend of mine observed that while her writing has developed, her production has only regressed. But with this album, I can't even see that the writing is getting there. Nor can I call it any good. Extremely light 5 out of 10, no recommendation, and even if you're a fan, I can see you finding this a real disappointment. And as with Tove Lo going forward, you know what, with her waning mainstream popularity, I can see her getting dropped from her label, but if she doesn't, she needs to get a new team and fast, because this has only gotten worse, and I would love to see her somehow turn this around. I don't know. We'll have to see. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Yeah, I've been away from the actual camera for a little bit while. I hope you guys saw the live stream that I had last Sunday. We actually raised a lot of money for a good cause for Autism Canada. I'm really grateful for all you who came out and support. I might do more of the live streams as we go, probably more coming up in the following year. We'll see how that evolves. But hey, if you actually want to buy or stream this particular album, links down in the description below. I got the poll up there. I'm curious where the Tove Lo fans are falling on this, if you guys are still sticking around. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys are curious like what's on my schedule, or want to see more reviews, or want to check out that episode of Billboard Breakdown that's also dropping today, links on the card right over there. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.